Welcome back to another episode of Just Say It. My name is Chase Davis, one of the pastors of the Well Church here in Boulder, Colorado, joined by Matt Patrick, my friend, guest, friend of the program. You may have seen him around.
Yeah, I'm a guest. Just hopping on here today.
We're going to talk about just war theory today. It's a topic we've talked about at Men's Night. I guess it was a few years ago at this point.
Yeah.
It's a topic that comes up anytime big geopolitical issues are happening. And I think it's fair to say big geopolitical issues have been happening. Just a few. Maybe you're not aware of those. We might touch on some of those. Want to really stick to more of the theology and the philosophy of just war theory, but of course it has practical applications. Before we get into that, I wanted to remind you of a few things we have coming up at our church. First of all, on May 2nd, Sunday, May 2nd, we are starting our marriage class. That's a 4-week class. If you're looking to get equipped in your marriage, whether you're getting engaged or seriously dating or you've been married for 20 years, this class is for you. And it's a skills-based class, meaning it's supposed to help you on communicating, resolving conflict, managing finances, all that kind of stuff. And of course, we teach it biblically, so there's going to be biblical instruction as well. That'll be on Sundays. We need you to RSVP for that. If you're interested in planning on coming, we'd love to see you there. It's been a huge blessing, a huge success over the years. We've got a few weddings coming up, and it's just wonderful to be part of that journey, so to speak, in people's lives, that we get to play a part in their lives in that way. Another thing we have coming up is the National Day of Prayer. We're hosting a National Day of Prayer event on May 7th, Thursday, May 7th, from 12 to 1 p.m. at the Well Church building, 300 South Broadway, here in Boulder, Colorado. It'll just be a time of prayer. We'll probably sing some songs, pray for our nation, but we're going to join in the effort nationally. I know there's something happening at the Colorado Capitol that day as well. That may be something you could look into, but I'll be here at the Well Church May 7th. And then wanted to remind you of Burn the Ships. We've got Dr. Stephen Wolf and Dr. Joe Rigney coming out August 31st and July 31st and August 1st, 2nd. If you're visiting out of town, we'd love for you to stick around until Sunday and join us for worship on Sunday. It'll be a weekend full of events. It's a great time. With your ticket price, you get meals, you get a concert. It's a wonderful time. I just got a call the other day at the church from a church in Denver. And I was talking to this pastor in Denver who's planning to bring 30 guys, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But he was asking lots of questions about it. He had never heard of Burn the Ship, so I wanted to make sure I explained to him, look, when you come to this Burn the Ship event, sometimes we don't even record the talks because they're a bit spicy, as some people say.
Caliente.
Yeah, so it's a great time. And if you've never been, we'd love for you to join us July 31st, August 2nd here in Boulder at our church building for Burn the Ships. Go to our website, boulderwell.org/burntheships for more information and register. Register today because tickets are discounted. Hopefully this discount is still available to you unless you're listening to this 2 months from now and it's not available to you. Either way,
you should still come.
You should still come and come to Burn the Ships this summer. It's going to be a great time. All right, before we do Just War Theory, which is a big topic, let's do our opening segment. What did you mean by that tweet? And I've talked already too much, so I want Matt to go first.
Yeah, I'll go first. All right, Chase. So a few days ago in the morning, you woke up,
What time?
assuming like 8 a.m.
Oh, okay.
You were probably already awake for a while, but
I was awake.
probably had read your Bible, had a nice quiet time
Sure.
with the Lord,
Okay.
went on a walk.
Interesting.
Is that what you do in the morning?
No. I try to get the kids to school.
Okay, so in between yelling at your kids to get in the car,
Yeah, right.
you tweeted, Father Abraham had many sons had Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. So let's just praise the Lord. Right arm. Mm-hmm. What did you mean by that tweet, Chase?
Are you familiar with this?
Yes.
Okay, good. Father Abraham had many sons, and many sons had Father Abraham. I am one of them,
People are
and
getting
so are
music
you.
today.
So let's just praise the Lord. Right arm. Bethany did it.
Yeah.
And then, you reply and say left arm, and it's fun. It's a funny tweet. It's funny.
Yeah.
Anyways, it's, growing up in Christian culture, you hear these songs, and sometimes it makes me sad that my kids don't get that privilege. We had Mother's Day out. I mean, this was like a banger. When you're 8 years old, you get to move your body, you get to interact and sing, and it's so wonderful to be part of God's people. And, that's a question people are asking today, particularly around who are God's people. Yeah. But that's part of what inspired the tweet. So sometimes I like to remember and recall how good God has been in his providence to me and raising me in Christian culture, giving me generally sound theology in the church I was in that led me to him and equipped me to think clearly about matters today. So, yeah.
I gave that one to you. I wanted to give you a nice, softball in there, and one to show that you tweet nicely, too.
I tweet nicely, believe it or not.
Believe it or not.
I'm learning. I asked a friend in a chat this morning if I can tweet that, and he says, do not do that. And I was like, all right, noted. You're a real buzzkill today, aren't you?
If you text me and you go, can I tweet that? I'm like, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, go for it. That's why I don't ask you.
Let's see what happens.
No.
Feeling cute might take down later.
Yeah, right. 3 days ago, I guess this was been Monday, Matt tweeted out at 8:18 a.m., in quotes, I'm tired. I hear men say this all the time. 9 out of 10 times they are not tired. They are just uninspired.
Yeah.
What did you mean by this tweet?
Yeah, what I meant by that was, as you know, in our roles, we meet with a lot of guys.
Yes.
And I just kind of noticed a trend, and everybody knows that's where all my men's advanced talks come from. I just keep a note on stuff that I'm seeing and just kind of look for trends in there. And I was talking to guys, and it seems like they have the capacity, if there's something that they like to do, they're suddenly very awake.
True.
You know what I mean? And they're like, and so I think a lot of guys kind of get stuck in the monotony of life and things like that. And so they lose kind of that energy and inspiration. I was thinking of my own story. Because, we planted this church coming up on 15 years ago in August, which is wild.
Yeah, it is.
And back then, it was a very inspiring time because everything was new.
Sure.
And when you settle into something, you can kind of just get stuck in kind of that rut of life and doing the things that you need to do, meetings and then these things and making sure stuff's right. And it can kind of lose its edge a little bit. And I think guys need that edge to be inspired. And so for me, it's something I've been trying to do in ministries. Hey, what are things that really inspire me towards ministry to make it so I don't show up to a meeting or something at work and go, oh, I'm so tired. Because that's kind of what we say.
Sure.
And I'm not saying guys can't be tired. You got small kids at home. Of course you can be tired. But a lot of times I'm like, I don't know if you're just tired or probably just uninspired.
Yeah.
And like if I'm like I was talking to a dude the other day who told me, he was like talking about work and family life. And he was, oh man, I'm just so tired. And then he started talking about going shooting.
Sure.
And I watched this dude like come alive.
Yeah.
And he was like going over all of the things that he was going to do and what he was working on. And it was like, I was like, and I just said to him, I was like, you sure you're tired or are you just uninspired? So that's where that came from.
Got it. That makes sense.
So that was a conversation I had with a man in our church.
Yeah, and it comes from, being a pastor here in kind of a techie town, a buzzword in that industry has been burnout. Yeah. And I remember dealing with this early on in our church. People would use that phrase all the time. I'm just burned out. I'm just burned out. And we were always like, we want to pastor people and love people well. If you're sincerely exhausted or something like that, how can we help you renew your strength in the Lord? At the same time, this seems to get thrown out for anything where you had to just work hard and now you're burned out and it's weird.
Yeah, no, I always want to teach guys, particularly men, I don't think there's anything better than working really hard in a day and coming home and actually being tired from the work you did. Yeah. I think that's a good thing, and our culture and society has kind of gotten rid of that.
For sure.
And so I think that's dumb. But also, if you're inspired, you can kind of push through a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right. Today's topic, just war theory.
Yep.
I want to set the stage a little bit because this podcast will live on the internet, and somebody could listen to this 2 years from now and wonder, what are we talking about? We'll talk about the principles, so it's pretty evergreen content.
Yep.
But as far as the context, what's been going on? I've heard just war theory thrown out recently in the last few months around several issues. Right now we have Trump in the White House. He's making moves. He's doing what he does. The first time this was invoked that I saw was when Trump wanted to acquire Greenland by some means. And this was opposed by Gavin Ortland on his show, and he invoked just war theory to oppose the acquisition or the pursuit of the acquisition of Greenland. Recently, Trump and the administration in our country has decided to go after Iran pretty seriously. We've had lots of bombs being dropped, lots of reasons for that that are very complicated. And I've heard many people, invoke just war theory to say this is either a violation of just war theory or this is not good because it violates just war theory. So it gets thrown out a lot by Christians who don't like a political action. And I think there's reason you can do that. It's not a bad thing to do, to consider these principles we're going to talk about in a second. But it often kind of gets trotted out as kind of like this this secret knowledge or this set of principles that, I have these insights into how geopolitics should work, and therefore, because I don't like this action, I'm going to invoke just war theory to show why it's wrong. That's what I see the pattern as. Is that what you're seeing too?
Yeah, 100%. I don't think most people. I would love to interview Gavin Newsom. If he ever wants to come on the show, he's welcome to come on.
Why Gavin Newsom? You mean Gavin Ortland?
Oh, Gavin Ortland, sorry. Or, I'm sure Newsom would probably use it too.
They're both liberals, but
yes.
Don't
That's
tell
why I mixed them up. Both graying.
Yes.
But anyways, I'd love to have him on. And I mean, a lot of these guys, I'm like, well, tell me what you mean by just war theory. Like, what principles of it are problematic for you? I think most Christians, I'm sure Gavin could answer that. Like, he's not dumb. But I think he could answer that. But I think a lot of Christians, when they say it, they're like, that's just a reason to not like how a war is being conducted.
Correct.
And I think there's lots of holes in that theory, which is really hard for me to say, and I don't want to jump ahead of where you were planning on going, because to critique just war theory means you're going to critique Augustine,
right,
and Calvin, right, like, and others, right, like that we generally look to as kind of stalwarts of our faith.
Yep.
And this is an area that I tend to disagree with them.
Yep.
And so it's an interesting thing where it's like most Christians I don't think know how it was developed and how it came to be.
Yep.
And kind of what rules are in war.
Yep.
Which is funny to say that there's rules at times.
Yes. So let's get into the kind of the principles and the history of it a little bit. The idea of like, when is a war justified is not like a novel concept. Like you watching like whatever news channel or Twitter feed or whatever you're watching, and you look at a war and you think, I have theories on why this is illegal. You're not the first person in your basement to ever do that. Cicero was in his basement also pontificating. And you get traces of various theories of when war is justified, when it's not, all throughout kind of the ancient world. But like you mentioned, Augustine is kind of the father of just war theory. He, kind of created the framework. He's writing in the midst of kind of Rome's decline, famous for the City of God and for his book Confessions. But it was more just like principles that were in City of God, rather than like, if you're looking for a book that's like Augustine's just war theory, you're not going to find it. Go read City of God, and it's kind of littered throughout there. One of the principles was war should be motivated mainly by love of neighbor, not hatred of a people or person. Mm-hmm. And so he's approaching it from that perspective. From what I understand of Augustine, he doesn't like war. I don't know. I mean, there are people that like war. They would be warmongers. But like, I don't know that anyone on their face loves war, because there's death, carnage, destruction. It's a horrible thing. But he's very much rooted in kind of a love of neighbor. And this gets into good Christian principles of like, we should be motivated when we oppose legislation or anything like that. It can be easy to fall into, we just hate it for the sake of hating it. We do it for a higher calling, for a love of neighbor, that we don't want our neighbors to suffer. We don't want our neighbors to sin. And so that's why we'd oppose it. Kind of got into Aquinas, or what nerds call the Thomists, the Thomistic tradition. Yeah. He's Roman Catholic, so this is in the Middle Ages. And then, of course, it went into Grotius and Calvin and many others in the Reformed tradition. You want to go through the principles of it, or do you want me to go through the principles of it? So I forget the Latin. Bellum justus is just war theory. This is the right to go to war. There's other kind of derivative, like what happens when you're in a war, what happens after a war. But the core principle is like, what are permissible conditions for you to execute a war? And so in just war theory, they all must be met. Like if you break one, you're not allowed to go. So it's not as if like we have to check 50%. It's not just like a quorum. It's a unanimous 6 kind of thing. So the first one is legitimate authority. Does the person waging war have legitimate authority, by which we mean duly constituted public authority to wage war, meaning like non-vigilantism? Is there a just cause, meaning self-defense, defense of an ally, a redress for aggression? That gets interesting because it gets into justice, theories of justice and vengeance, and the state bearing the sword. Right intention, meaning are the goals clear? What are we trying to accomplish? And are those goals good? Not just are they clear? Last resort, have other nonviolent measures been exhausted? And that's always a question, that people bring up to promote this idea. They want to do diplomacy ad nauseum. And then you get reasonable probability of success. I mean, obviously, if you don't have a reasonable probability of success, so it's like no hopeless wars. I really don't know how that would work for my forefathers at the Alamo, but, whatever. 6, proportionality, proportionality, expected good outweighs expected evil. So is there a better likelihood of good outcomes than evil outcomes? I think that's the summary I've got. Is that a fair summary? Anything you want to add on that?
No, I think that is the summary, and that is all of them. I think it's just worth pointing out, as we'll probably do through some of these and discuss some of the problems there, is immediately when you read these, I think the question of who gets to decide what is what, and this is the biggest problem, right? And it's very easy to leverage these things against an opponent in any circumstance of war, right? And so that's the problem with it. I appreciate the attempt to give a framework to going to war. I'm not a fan of just going to war for the sake of going to war.
Right.
I don't think anybody should. But I think you can see the problems that it runs into pretty quickly when you just try to apply this across the board. Who gets to decide what? Like, who's determining these sorts of things? The one I will say, like on the first point, is I think as Christians it's important to actually draw out the vigilantism kind of thing. Is like that as Christians, we have to understand. We already did a podcast on this, so I won't get into it. But like is our desire for justice, and even like things like revenge and stuff, we believe that revenge belongs to the Lord, right? That doesn't mean we become a wet blanket. We don't ever do anything to protect ourselves or anything like that. But what we can't have is a bunch of vigilantes running out there just trying to wage wars on their own.
Right.
That's not a good thing to do.
Right.
It gets harder when you have the government that you may have, if you completely disagree with them, or if they're just everybody believes they're a terrible government and they're supposed to be the ones wielding the sword,
right? And
how they're wielding it is terrible. That brings up other conversations.
Yeah, we could go back into the American Revolution and talk about that. But I think, obviously the good things are they're trying to draw from biblical principles, draw from Christian history, draw from Western civilization, and put in writing just some ideas, some principles to think about these matters. We believe in Romans 13 that the state bears the sword, and they don't bear it in vain. And so we're not, by critiquing it, we're not trying to dismiss. I'm sure there's tons of literature out there. I know there is. One reason I think it's interesting to bring just war theory up is because it's like one of the only threads throughout Western civilization and Christian history that's pretty consistently like evaluated and either reinforced or critiqued on the topic of violent aggression or justice. And justice has been recently a big theme in our culture in terms of what is just, what is unjust. But Christians haven't done a lot of thinking of like, okay, so we want to avoid vigilantism. What about self-defense? What about redress of grievances? Personally, like all this stuff is very curious to me because I don't think the church is very equipped to think through these things very well. And if we are, it's often very pacifistic in a way that is very detached from reality and kind of the situation on the ground in people's lives, what we're dealing with in courts, what we're dealing with overseas. So I just think a lot of it, there's a lack of education on this topic.
Yeah. No, it's funny. It's like if I think of like the church now and this sort of stuff, I think the church generally has a disposition towards if we can avoid any form of conflict, avoid it.
Yeah.
Like that's like the big problem when we start dealing with this sort of thing, where it's almost like this idea. I grew up in, I think, a little bit different time, and I had a different father. I hear people say, if I'm going to get in a fight, right, like I'll never throw the first punch. I was taught that's stupid. Like, my dad was kind of like, hey, if you're going to get hit, you might as well win. You know what I mean? Like, sure. And so there's a way of thinking that goes into these things. I think it's important for people to think about how would I go about if I put it on the ground personally.
Yeah.
For me, how would that play out?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so there's a lot of, I hate to use the word nuance to this,
sure.
but there definitely is.
Yeah. So with that said, let's get into our critiques, because
Okay.
that's what we want to get into.
Yes.
The theory of just war, again, respect it, honor it, interested in it, and also we view it as not durable in many situations. And looking back in history, I don't know from this side of the historical vantage point that a lot of wars that we would say are good have been just or have been carried out. That's the other thing in just war theory. There's principles. I mean, all this got enshrined in law with the Geneva Conventions. That was informed by just war theory in a sense. So, look, if you've got two Christian nations, ostensibly Christian nations, not just like culturally Christians, but like one monarch, let's say, in Switzerland, because they never go to war, we'll use them. You've got a monarch in Switzerland, it's a Swiss Protestant country, and it's a monarchy. And then you've got Germany, and it's not a monarchy, it's an aristocracy or something like this, but it's a Christian country. This can be a helpful thing with like the religious wars to mitigate against, unnecessary bloodshed. But when you get into warfare, geopolitical situations with people who do not abide by your principles and aren't operating your way, this framework seems to only lead to being a loser because you're operating off a very principled stand and they're just going to take advantage of you left and right. Is that, that seems really crude and a crass way to put it. Is that what you would say?
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about it is, I would actually say oftentimes, particularly starting, I would maybe point towards World War II.
Okay.
Okay, that'd be like a turning point historically in global wars or geopolitics, okay?
Okay.
So what you have is you have the Allies. We're not here to debate whether we should get into that war and all the things that come with that, but just on its face, what you had was the Allies were actually trying to use this principle.
Yep.
And that was like kind of their guiding principle. The problem with that was Japan and Germany were not.
Okay.
That's like one of the first times in history that they were like, the Japanese were take no prisoner, no holds barred,
It's true.
especially.
I think Germany was a bit closer just because
Yes.
of their Christian history, but especially Japan.
Yeah, and so what you see then is you see the Allies changing tactics throughout World War II, where the bombings become necessary. So we get the bombing of Dresden, which that's a civilian population.
Correct.
You get fire bombings of Tokyo.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And ultimately, as the war ends,
The atomic bomb.
with an atomic bomb, none of that fits into just war theory.
Correct.
Right? Like that does not work. But the reality came is we will lose this war
Right.
if we do not do these things.
Yeah, and that's why I've seen a lot of my friends who are into these kind of topics question the legitimacy of dropping the atomic bomb. And again, that's a fair debate. We're not beholden to worship any action America takes.
Yeah.
We can revisit this stuff, but yeah, it leads to a lot of issues for Christians, especially.
Yeah, I've got a couple of points here we can go over, but one of my critiques, right? So one is reciprocity. So we already kind of started talking about that. There's like an assumption that the rules bind both sides, but then you basically have one side goes, I don't play by those rules.
Correct.
And so in particularly, the easy one you can think of there is going to be, how are the practices or the traditional formulations of like war assume both sides recognize principles like discrimination and proportionality, but then one side doesn't, right? So all of a sudden you're just stuck in this place. And most notably, the Afghan war, the Iraq war, things like this, where it's like not allowed to fire until fired upon. All of these things are guided by just war.
Right.
Okay, and so what you have is you have these people kind of stuck to not be able to do their job in a war setting.
Correct.
That's the problem with it. That's one. And then you get into like stuff like non-state actors.
Yep.
Or rogue regimes.
Yep.
They're not playing by the same rules.
Correct.
Doing that kind of stuff. The interesting one, and I was that if I'm critiquing, it's kind of asymmetric conflicts, or like indistinguishable combatants.
Yep.
Okay. So what do you do when an enemy starts using like human shields?
Correct.
Not wearing uniforms. Uniforms is actually a really important part of understanding just war theory.
Sure.
Flying the flag, like actually saying who you are.
Right.
What if you're fighting an enemy that sends a child with a suicide vest
Right.
out?
Right.
Right? Like, or not wearing anything, like, under a burqa, as we've seen.
Yep.
Like that. Those are things that have happened. And so you all of a sudden you're like, well, we're following these principles, but we're all going to die
Yep.
if we follow these principles. And all of a sudden it breaks down Because there's no moral equality in the soldiers between the two sides.
Correct.
Right? Like operating from a completely different framework, like you said at the top, right? Coming from Western civilization, there was like an idea of how war was to be played out.
Right.
And it's funny if you think of the American Revolution, in some respect, the United States kind of broke away from that to win the war.
Yep.
With more of a guerrilla warfare tactic.
Yeah, in some cases, yeah.
And then the third one is, we call it ideal theory or subjectivity and perverse incentives. So that critique is just war theory functions as a elegant ideal theory.
Yeah.
Right? That's too vague.
Yep.
Its vagueness does not actually lead to the outcomes that it kind of set out to do. Which is funny because Augustine, the reason he came up with it, he was trying to protect Rome from being captured, but ultimately in falling.
Yep.
And ultimately Rome fell.
Yep.
So you might look at it and go, I love you, Augustine,
right,
but I think you're off on this one.
Sure. Yeah, and I think, with the kind of principled, like, it really overlaps with a lot of principled conservatives today, and how they kind of cling to their principles in terms of how politics should be done, rather than how politics is being done and what politics is. So, like, one is like, the good person, the just warrior, is accountable to law. There's a guiding principle that we don't want to violate, while the terrorist, and the example would be one who exploits the law and then uses it as a shield. So every conflict then becomes a restraining force on those who are principled, and a strategic advantage for those who are operating unjustly. And so what do you do with that, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think we're here to provide answers philosophically, but these are not just critiques Matt and Chase are coming up with either. These are critiques that have been raised by others. And I think in the age of like Islamic terrorism particularly, it has elicited a lot of frustration and a lot of it's one thing when you're nation against nation with uniformed combatants, and it's pretty clear who's fighting who. It's a totally different game when it's not just guerrilla. It's an Islamic terroristic attack on children, on people, and on our war fighters. So
the other thing too, I would just point out is I think just war theory doesn't really have a way to go about. It does in a sense, because it talks about, has all reasonable actions been taken
right,
to prevent war from happening?
Right.
But if all reasonable actions have been taken to prevent war from happening, but you're fairly certain that it's going to come, that some form of attack is going to come, I don't see a way in just war theory where you can kind of be preventative
correct
in the action and quite literally killing people or ending a regime
right
before it does its thing. A good example of that would be North Korea.
Yep.
Like, our desire was for them to not have a nuclear weapon. We had talks and talks and talks and talks, and they lied and lied and lied and lied, or negotiated very well, actually. And our leaders were kind of weak in much of that, and ultimately that led to North Korea having ICBMs with nukes.
Right.
And that's not good for anybody.
Nope.
Because of their ideologies.
Yes.
That's really hard for people to receive that. But it's like, and people will argue, well, why can we have it? I'm like, well, because of the principles of our nation.
Right.
Because
we're better. Yeah. They're not. They're a communistic dictatorship.
Yeah, I know. It's hard on that front. And so, like, if you look at Iran, whether you agree that it was that Trump decided to attack Iran, is it Iran or Iran?
Depends. Yeah, Iran. Let's go with Iran.
Iran was, the big claim was to end their capabilities to produce a nuclear weapon.
Correct.
Right? And so, like, what I've heard, at least from different, like, I think Hegseth and then the Joint Chiefs was discussing it, where it's like, no, they've basically taken uranium up to 60%, which nobody needs that for anything else other than creating a nuclear weapon, because you can spin it up to 90% to 100% very fast from there. And so they've stated their goals, which is to wipe out other nations.
Yeah.
And death to America.
Yeah, they have said this.
Yes.
It's kind of one of their things.
And so it's kind of like, well, what are we going to do?
I know.
And so
And I think there's a lot of questions, and they're legitimate questions about why we got involved, how we got roped in. Did Israel geopolitically manipulate us into getting into this war? There's been some press about that. So all of that's that's on the table in terms of
fair game.
Yeah, fair game. It's also on the table if we're going to do fair game, maybe just war rhetorically, is that there may be bigger things than just Iran going on. Right, there could be China and Russia going on as well. So there's just a lot we can't know, and I think that's frustrating to people in an information age when they expect to have kind of access to all knowledge.
Yes,
there's things going on, and like you mentioned with the last kind of did all other measures get basically exhausted? No one even agrees on what those measures are. Like no one, like who's determining what last measures are? This was always the critique from the left towards Bush regarding Iraq, which at this point, I'm very sour that we ever went there. It's not just regrettable. I think it was a waste for us to go to Iraq and wage war there.
I blame Cheney.
Yeah. Well, Cheney was just doing it for the love of the game, from what I've heard. No, but nobody even agrees. What would have been a last resort option, and so the principles just break down pretty quickly. They sound really clean on paper, and they may comfort the kind of conservative, political conservative who tries to be a principled person, but they just break down.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing, too, to think about in all of this, when we're talking about war just in general, again, I don't think anybody wants war.
Right.
Right? Of course, there's some nefarious cabal out there that probably does.
Mm-hmm.
But the average person doesn't like war. But where Christians lack a knowledge on this kind of stuff is how is peace attained?
Right.
Right? If even taking it from a biblical perspective, right? The Lord will wield a sword against, evil.
Right.
He will slay it, right? These are things that God does. And a lot of times I think we actually perceive our intentions holier than God's on how we're to handle situations.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when we're just sitting on our couch watching the news or whatever we're doing, or on Twitter or whatever, we can have all these assumptions. But the problem is you have to go, if I truly want peace, sometimes there is going to be a altercation or a war at the large scale to get to peace.
Yep.
And that's a hard thing, I think, for modern Christians to understand.
Yes. Each one of the principles also is not that clear. There's lots been written. I haven't read not anything. I haven't read everything written on just war theory, but each of the principles breaks down at a certain point. And it's hard for modern people, particularly with principles like just war theory, mm-hmm. because we think as engineers and lawyers, and we're looking for the rules and the data and check boxes. And I don't think that's how Augustine meant it, and I don't even think that's how Aquinas would articulate it, even though he was very robust in how he reflected upon matters. But who defines just war? It's defined by the belligerent. How do we define that it has a right intention, right? A good motive. It assumes an epistemic reflection that's almost impossible for any human to attain to in terms of pure motives. That's not saying there can't be bad motives and good motives, but it assumes a judgment and an insight that oftentimes we're not afforded. Probability of success, what probability are we going with? 60%, 80%, 100%? Who's determining that?
Yeah.
And how does it come down to that? And then proportionality is one of the principles. Okay, what does it mean to be proportional? How many casualties? How many, what weapons can we use? All of these things are very easily, they break down in application many times. That doesn't mean we have to discard our principles, but it should give us a bit of a pause from being too rigid on our principles, that we aren't either creative or humble, and we don't have wisdom along with the principles.
Yeah, and not to knock it completely, I think on the proportionality, I think there's a lot of good in there.
Right.
And I would say you actually see the United States right now, at some level, whether you agree with it or not, we could completely take them out.
Yes.
That's not a question, right? And so they're actually using restraint in what they're doing. And we have in other wars as well. We didn't use nukes, for example.
Right.
To just completely demolish a whole entire nation.
Yep.
Which we could do, and we haven't done, which is good.
Yes.
I think that is good. But at the same time, it's how many lives of our own countrymen get lost in overly using something like proportionality.
Right.
You can see how complex that gets really quick.
Yep.
Do you just, like you always hear, you play to win the game, right?
Right, yeah.
You play to win the game, but like how you play to win the game does matter.
And I think the kind of last thing I wanted to mention as a critique would be, by holding this principle, which again, we're just critiquing it, it's useful and it's part of our heritage. So we want to be cognizant of it. It can be applied. We also don't want to hold up the principle as if it's a biblical law that God himself would violate.
Yes.
And God in the Old Testament did command certain actions against certain peoples, which by all human reasoning seems to violate the principles of just war theory.
Yes.
And so we want to be very careful if we ever think we're in a position to judge God by either historical kind of perceptions of what a just war has caused. And I'm sure there's legitimate just war theorists that could articulate theologically and biblically how it's different, okay? I'm just saying off the bat, off the cuff, if you look at the Old Testament, there were cases where God commanded his people to go wipe out another people. And that elicits tons of other questions that we're not going to get into. I'm simply saying if we were to use the just war theory metric to evaluate that action, we are in danger of attributing to God ill motive. We're in danger of attributing to God a lack of proportionality, all these things that are tidy principles on paper, but not actually like legitimate when it comes to how God commands things in the Old Testament. Am I saying that clear enough?
No, I think that's great. Yeah, it's a problem if, like we say all the time on Sundays, if you find yourself disagreeing with what God said to do in the Bible, then that's a problem that you need to rectify in your own soul.
Yes.
Because He is right, He is true, He is good, He is perfect, and He is just.
Right.
And so if that doesn't sit well with your theory, and which was developed
right.
by men, then maybe you need to re-examine that theory.
Yeah, and I'm sure Augustine had wonderful ways that he would explain these matters. Yes. We're just trying to elicit a bit of reflection and not be so principled that it leads us to inaction, it leads us to passivity, and kind of a Christian loserdom where we're not able to think. And these theories, the reason they're we're talking globally, we're talking about nations, but going back to the beginning of the episode, there are things that we need to reflect upon in our lives. I think a lot of times as humans, we feel like an injustice has happened, whether it's a personal slight or something legally against you or whatever it may be. And it is important to reason soundly with a Christian mind about what is legitimate in any given case and the consequences of that action. I think a lot of men can be tempted to take action without necessarily thinking about the consequences. If I do this, then what? Right? And that can lead to unnecessary mistakes. It can lead to a lack of wisdom. It can lead to foolishness. And we don't want to be men who are foolish. We want to be men who are wise. But each one of these can be personal reflections as well. Whether you're arguing or whatever it may be, have I exhausted all my other options? Have I tried other things? Do I have a good chance of success if I pursue this path to get justice? Mm-hmm. All this stuff is legitimate Christian reflection that I think can be productive for people. For sure.
I think we covered it.
I think that's it. I'm assuming you might have questions or thoughts or your own perspective. Happy to hear from you. info@boulderwell.org. Just send your email there. I'm sure it'll make its way to Matt and I somehow if you send it there. But we'd love to hear from you. We'd also love to see you. Join us for worship on Sundays, 9 and 10:45 a.m., 300 South Broadway, the Well Church, Boulder, Colorado. But thank you for tuning in today, and we'll see you next time.